From the 22 News Plus studio, this is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of InFocus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. I am here in the studio with Richard Parr. He is the Vice President of MassINC Polling Group, and today we're talking about not only conducting polls in the Bay State, how they do it and so forth, but a specific report that recently came out over the last couple of weeks about the need for better transportation here in the Pioneer Valley. Richard, thank you so very much for joining me today. I greatly appreciate your time. Before we get into the study that came out, let's talk a little bit more about MassINC's polling group. What do you do and how do you do it?
Sure, thanks. So we're part of the larger MassINC, which is a organization based in Boston, does a lot of statewide policy and advocacy work. They've been around for about 30 years. They're one of the people who coined the term gateway cities, which is used to refer to places like Springfield and Holyoke and Pittsfield out here, sort of kind of old mill towns that are now a place where people can get a foothold in the middle class and really build themselves up. And that's important to MassINC's mission.
So those gateway cities, why the term gateway? What's the point?
Yeah, gateway to the middle class was the original thinking on it.
Okay.
So the idea that you could be new to the country, come in here. There's a lot of immigrant populations in some of these cities.
Yeah,
Holyoke, for
exactly.
example, Lowell has a huge Cambodian population. That's another gateway city. These are, the old mill cities of
Right.
Massachusetts, and they've needed to sort of reinvent themselves. And in the course of reinventing themselves, they create opportunities for people to come in and start new businesses and kind of rise up into the middle class. So as an economic development strategy, that was something that MassINC was started on, and they continue to do that work. We started about 15 years ago doing their polling for them, but now we do polling for many other people, including the state. The project that we're going to talk about today was a project that we did for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And then the third leg of the stool at MassINC is Commonwealth, or used to be called Commonwealth Magazine. Now it's called Commonwealth Beacon. And it's a website and it's journalism. They do really in-depth reporting about state policy issues. They've got their own podcasts that we collaborate with on from time to time. So it's a great organization to work for.
Is Commonwealth a partisan group, nonpartisan group?
Yeah.
Does either the right or the left, the blue party, the red party fund what you do, so your reporting leans a certain way?
We try not to. I mean, we are nonpartisan and bipartisan. So if you look at the MassINC board, we've got Democrats and Republicans on it, which is a bit of a feat in Massachusetts because we're a pretty blue state, right?
Right.
But we take that seriously. And then the way that reflects our polling is we do not take on Democratic or Republican candidates or parties. We will work on ballot questions, we'll work on issue campaigns. And yes, those always have a slant to them, but they're not explicitly affiliated with either party. So we take that really seriously and we try to play down the middle, both in terms of the clients that we choose, but also how we write our questions and how we work with people.
And how you write your questions is crucial because you want to make sure they're not leading a certain answer. So, if a group is asked, has hired you to do certain polling, you don't want to create the question so that it leans favorably or unfavorably.
Exactly. And the way I view it is if you're writing a question that's leading, you're kind of doing your client a disservice
Oh, absolutely.
because
Yeah.
I would hope the clients come to us thinking, well, I really need to know where my issue stands. And if I give you a biased question that shows that you're really popular, you might feel good about that, but it's not going to be actionable information
It's
for
not
you
helpful.
to help you with your campaign, to help you with, how should I do messaging around this topic? How should I think about my communication strategy or what my budget is to spend to make this issue happen at the state level?
So we're in the mid 2020s right now. Polling is a lot different today than it was 10, 15, 20, 40 years ago. For many years, I worked for the ratings company Nielsen. The backbone of their business is polling and surveys to find out what people are watching on TV. How do you do that nowadays? There are very few landlines out there. Nobody really reads snail mail. Email, is it spam? Text messaging spam, so forth. So how do you recruit these people to participate?
Yeah, this is probably the single biggest challenge in the survey industry as a whole right now. And Nielsen is still a really big player in it. there's a variety of ways you can do it. When I started working at MassINC polling about a dozen years ago, we were still able to call people on the telephone and get a decent response rate. Not huge, but decent.
Hmm.
Now that's really dropped off a cliff because people are in mostly on cell phones and have caller ID, and if they don't recognize the
Right.
number, they're not going to pick it up. So what do? In some cases, you can go back to the mail. You can mail somebody a little postcard with a link and maybe an incentive to get them to take your survey. Um, Texting people a link to a survey so they're not on the phone with a person on, and they can basically take it on their own time. That's
Good
been
idea.
helpful. And increasingly, there are companies that have people who have signed up to take surveys. That has a host of issues and pitfalls that you need to be really careful about. But in terms of people who uh, are not who they say they are or are just trying to take the surveys to get their incentive, but we have some checks in place in the way that we do our surveys in order to prevent that sort of thing from happening.
So where do the ideas for the polls come from? So these companies hire you, and it could be, and I'm just throwing this out there, like Bay State Health System, they want to know more about their customers, their patients, so they hire you to do a survey in Western Mass to find out whatever answers. Is that how it works?
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes clients come with us with a survey that they've done in another state and they want it done in Massachusetts. Sometimes they don't have anything, they just have an idea or an issue. I want to see this happen in the state. What are some questions that I should be asking about? How would you help me to conduct this poll? And then in that case, we're working with them to kind of craft the questions and make the questionnaire and get it into the field and then analyze the data and tell them what it all means.
Fascinating information. We need to take our first break. I'm here in the 22 News Plus studio with Richard Parr from the MassINC polling group. We will be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back to today's edition of In Focus. I'm here in the 22 News Plus studio with Richard Parr from the MassINC polling group. Richard, thank you again for joining me. In the first portion of this conversation, we talked about what the polling group does, how you do what you do. But over the course of the last several weeks, a study was issued based on your polls and the data that you collected on transportation here in the Pioneer Valley. Give me the overall picture of who asked for the study and maybe, and why.
Sure. Yeah. So this was a study that was commissioned by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. It was done by the Office of Transportation Planning in that organization, and their charge within Mass DOT is to conduct research to understand how are people getting around, what are the challenges that they're facing, how can we as a Department of Transportation do our projects better or differently in order to solve some of those problems. The charge to us, they hired us to partner with a community organization and figure out what are the challenges that that organization and the people that they serve are facing.
So which organization did you partner with?
So we ended up working with an organization out of Springfield called Wayfinders.
Okay.
And Wayfinders is a community development corporation, a CDC, and they own housing throughout the Hampden and Hampshire County. They've got properties in Northampton and Springfield and Holyoke and a few other places. They also are a major provider of sort of economic support services like housing vouchers or other types of rental assistance for people who are having trouble making their rent and just trying to keep family stability. They also have a shelter program, a temporary shelter program for people who are maybe homeless or between things and need some transitional assistance. So they're doing a lot of really important work.
So what did they want to know?
So we wanted to understand, since they're serving a very needy population in terms of their housing needs, how is transportation kind of layering on as a challenge on top of their housing needs? And we know that housing is one of the top issues in the state overall, so that was one of the reasons we wanted to work with them. What is the nexus between housing and transportation for really, really low-income people here in Western Massachusetts?
So what did the study, what were the questions you asked, and what did the study show?
Yeah, so a lot of it was really just about how do you get around? Like what are the ways that you get around? What are the challenges that you face? And most of the people that we talk to are actually drivers. Even
Okay.
though they're very much on the lower end of the income scale, a lot of people were telling us that they really feel like they need to have a car to get around this particular region of the state. We're a pretty rural region when you get outside of the big cities, so I think that kind of makes sense. The folks that we talked to at Wayfinders, they were a little bit more non-white, a little bit even lower on the lower income scale. They were more concentrated in the cities like Springfield and Holyoke than other folks in that same kind of lower income strata in the state, because we did a comparison survey to sort of be
Hmm.
able to look at the two. And what we found was really that the Wayfinders folks were facing significantly higher challenges in terms of how they get around and how they can afford to get around out here.
So, I mean, we have the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority. Everybody calls it the PVTA. Is that a beneficial element to people in our communities in
Yes.
transportation?
I think so. I mean, what we found in this survey was, we asked people, do you think that PVTA is good enough that you can use it to get around or not? And, close to half of people basically said, yeah, I think it is good enough that I could use it. And then the people who are actually currently using it, a majority of them, 54%, are saying, yeah, it's good. It's good enough. There's
But
a
there
lot
still
of,
has to be a cost hurdle with PVTA too, because I mean, you're talking low income homes, but they still need to ride the bus. So, I mean, you have fares that people have to pay to ride the bus.
Yeah. So what something interesting happened during the time when we did this study, because we did this during last year and it's since been released now. But the PVTA is now free. It's a new
Really?
service that all of the regional transit buses around the state outside of the MBTA area that serves Boston are now free to ride. And that money is coming from the millionaire's tax, or the so-called fair share amendment that passed a couple of years ago from voters. It was being piloted at the time that we were doing this study, and it was interesting because some of the people in the focus groups that we did as in connection with these surveys did not know that the PVTA was free.
I didn't
So
know it was free
yeah,
until just now.
so there's a little bit of a kind of a communication issue here, right? That there may be options that would be available to people that they might take advantage of if they knew that they were free for them to use.
So for those people that were part of the survey that were using the free buses, they seem to feel that the bus system in our area was adequate enough to help them along, go to jobs, take the kids to school, medical appointments, or whatever. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, I would say that they're getting by with it.
Okay.
And what we found was that if you are a person who's relying on the bus to get around, and remember, some people do different modes, right?
Right.
You might have a car sometimes, but you might share that with your spouse, and then you might
Mm.
have to take the bus, or somebody might need to take an Uber or a Lyft or some other kind of ride to get there. But what we tended to find is people were finding ways to make it work. But they had complaints. They wanted it to come more often. They wanted it to be faster. They wish the routes were more direct, because sometimes the bus will have to go to multiple places. We found that people who are working in these surveys, their commute times were much longer if they were a bus rider than if they drove or if they took Uber or Lyft, which does make a fair amount
Right.
of sense. But that's still time that they can't spend with their families or doing other things that they need to do.
It's interesting. I lived in the New York City metropolitan area for a long time. Trains, buses, it's just a way of life. But you're right. Now, driving from home to here every day, it's point A to point B, takes me about 20 minutes. But if I were to take the bus, it would probably take me at least an hour. And I
Yeah.
have to imagine that's the hurdle that you heard from people.
Exactly. And it is a mindset kind of change. If you're in New York City, everyone is just used to taking
Same with
the
Boston, yeah.
subway. Boston, a little
Chicago,
bit
yeah.
less so. I mean, I'd say before the pandemic, the mode shift in Boston was about 50% of the people coming into Boston to commute every day were taking some form of public transit
That's
as
it.
opposed to driving. Yeah.
Wow, I would have
It's
thought
lower
much
than it.
higher.
Yeah. New York is really an outlier in terms of transit in America, in terms of it's the one city where the system is so built up that you can really rely on it to get around without ever really needing a car if you wanted to.
So, what are some of the results, or what are some of the interesting tidbits of facts that you found through this study?
Well, I think that the thing that was most disturbing to us when we got the results back and started going through them was that the cost of transportation was the thing that really stood out as a problem. I mean, people did tell us that they had problems making certain types of trips, and that getting to work on time or being late to places was a problem. But 80% of the folks in this Wayfinders sample that we got from working with them, and they were an awesome partner on this. They provided their database, and we were able to get 1,600 people to take this survey. 80% of those people said that the cost of getting around was at least somewhat of a burden for them. And so what does that mean? It means that 62% of them were telling us that they've had trouble paying other bills because they had to afford to, pay for transportation. 75% of them have said that they had to not make a certain trip because they couldn't afford to make that trip. So this cost thing has real impacts on people's lives in terms of, if you have a car and you can't afford to fix that car and then you're stuck and you're trying to find another way to get around, that can be really hard, especially if you're not used to using the bus system, or if you're not used to using Uber or Lyft or one of these other things that we have as an alternative.
We need to take our next break. We're with Richard Parr from MassINC Polling Group. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back to this edition of InFocus. I'm here in the studio with Richard Parr, the Vice President of the MassINC Polling Group, and we're talking about some studies that were recently issued on transportation here in the Bay State. Richard, thank you again for joining me. Greatly appreciate your time.
You bet.
So the study that recently came out was really just Pioneer Valley.
Mm-hmm.
People, the Wayfinders were the instigator of the poll. They wanted to know how their constituents get around. Looking at the bigger picture, has your group done any work with transportation east to west, west to east? And I say that because the east-west, west-east rail, whatever you want to call it, has really been a hot button over the course of the last couple of years. I know myself, I would love to see it. As I mentioned earlier, I lived in New York City for a long time, so using trains is wonderful. Have you done any work with Mass DOT on the train system?
Yes. So we've done a lot of surveys over the years about transportation for a lot of different clients. This was the first time we got to work with DOT specifically. And we did ask about East-West Rail, or West-East Rail, I guess, as we call it out here, in this survey with these two samples that we did. So we had the Wayfinders folks, and then we did a broader, lower income sample as well to sort of compare the two. But East-West Rail is really popular. People were telling us that they would be likely to ride this to Boston or to Worcester and to Boston if it was to happen. I've done other surveys that have found this to be a popular idea. People like public transit, even though most people are drivers. They love to have that option. They love to know that they wouldn't need to necessarily take the car for all the different things that they want to do.
I mean, I look at the ability to get to Boston, Worcester, Framingham, Natick. The drive on the Mass Turnpike can be white knuckle, nerve wracking, but to be able to sit on a train, go see a Red Sox game, go see a show at a theater, whatever it might be, a museum, and not have to worry about driving home at midnight. That's perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. We asked in this survey about different types of trips that people make. Whether it's to go shopping or drop your kid off at daycare or go to the doctor. And the number one trip that people were having trouble with in both of the surveys that we did was getting to Boston.
Okay.
By a far and away. And it makes sense too. It's a longer trip. It's outside of the region. You got to figure this out. Maybe you're sharing a car with somebody. You got to kind of work out the details of it. What we heard in the focus groups that we did as a companion to these surveys, that a lot of these Boston trips are medical trips.
Okay.
People are going to Boston because there's a specialist that they need to see, or they just want to go to the best hospitals in the world, which we have in Boston, right? So there's a lot of nexus between. We talked earlier about the nexus between housing and transportation. There's a lot of nexus between healthcare and transportation in this survey too. People telling us that they have to skip medical appointments because they can't get to them because they don't have the transportation to get to them. That was a big thing that came out in the survey as well.
So the getting from east to west, west to east. So what are the action points from this study? What does Mass DOT do with all of this? Do they increase trains, buses from Springfield, from Northampton, Pittsfield, Northampton, Springfield to Boston? What happens with all this data?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So DOT has, as I said, the Office of Transportation Planning has taken all this in. They're looking at everything from specific streets where people told us that there were potholes in the focus groups. That was a big topic of conversation. People have their hated streets that they love to mention. To this West-East rail. Now they can say, hey, look, this percentage of people in this survey said that they would take the train if it were to can't come in. So that gives them some sense of what the demand would be for this service if they were to implement it. The PVTA has also seen this report and has implemented some more frequent service and expanded service in some places. And I think they're looking at these numbers and seeing where people want to go and how they want to get there. So I think it is actually going to have an impact kind of behind the scenes in a way that we hope that a lot of our research gets to have.
So would Mass DOT take the results of this survey, or even PVTA take the results of this survey, and look and keep that as sort of a building block for other investments? So if the state of Massachusetts is looking to do investment in Western Mass, maybe convert buildings into office space or manufacturing, do they look at studies like this and say, okay, is it on a bus route? Because we need to get the employees from home to work every day. Does DOT or PVTA look at these reports, on an ongoing basis for additional, future projects?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that we found, for example, regarding the buses was that commute times are longer if you take a bus. Also, the people who are relying on the bus are more likely to work odd shifts. They're more likely to work at night. They're more likely to work early in the morning or overnight shifts. So what can we do to help them? Maybe we run buses at different times of day in order to get those people where they need to be and kind of look at that demand that's not being met right now. So I think that's what these surveys can do. They can show you a demand that's not being met, and then it's up to the state agencies to figure out how do we meet that demand.
So the data that you've collected, so that's just now sits in a repository, and other organizations that may have interest in that contact you to purchase the data.
Well, yeah, I mean, in this case, the data is with DOT. So this report lives on the website on the DOT website. Anybody can go and read it and download it. There's much more that didn't make it into the report. That's all with DOT, and they're going to work with it and figure out what they need to do with it. But yeah, we believe it's important to get as much of our information out there as our clients want to have out there as possible.
So switching gears slightly, Mass Polling Inc. as a group, do you work with just Mass DOT? Do you work with anybody who just needs polling done, politicians, whatnot?
Yeah, so we don't necessarily work with candidates of either party, but we will work with we have worked with municipal governments to understand sustainability and climate change. We've worked with advocacy organizations that want to explore having ballot questions maybe on the ballot. A whole host of different organizations, nonprofit and for-profit, have come to us to look for polling, and we're always looking for more.
So if folks want to get in touch with you to learn more about the polls that you've created, or maybe they want to recruit you, how do organizations do that?
Yeah, so you can go to our website. It's MassINC, MassINC, polling.com. And then we tend to put all of our reports up there, all of our new poll releases, and you can learn more about us and get in touch with us about hiring us if you have a project that you want to work on.
Fantastic. Richard Parr, I want to thank you so very much for your time today. Fascinating information to hear about how the transportation needs in our community are and aren't being met. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.